Welcome back, wanderer. The night has come again. The world has slowed. The fires have burned low, and the long hours of darkness stretch before you. There is nothing you must do tonight, nothing you must finish, nothing you must remember. There is only this, the voice, the story, and the long, slow descent into sleep. Take a deep breath slowly. Let it out slowly. Let the day fall away from you like leaves loosening from a branch in autumn. Feel the weight of your body sink a little deeper into the place where you rest. Tonight, we return to the world of the Old Norse, to the realm of Asgard, with its golden halls, to Midgard, the world of mortals, to Jotunheim, the wild lands of the giants beyond the sea. And tonight, our tale will follow one god above all others, the mightiest warrior of the Aesir, the protector of gods and humans alike, the Thunderer, the Stormbringer, the friend of mankind. His name is Thor. You may know him from echoes of the old stories, from thunderclaps on summer evenings, from the day of the week named in his honor, from whispered tales of a red-bearded god with a hammer that struck like lightning. But the Thor of the Old Norse was greater than these echoes. He was the wall that stood between humanity and the chaos of the giants. He was the one who, when the storm winds rose and the giants stirred in their cold halls, took up his hammer and rode out to keep the world safe. Tonight, we will follow him on 5 great journeys. We will see how his hammer was forged. We will travel with him to the hall of a giant king who is not what he seems. We will laugh gently at the day his hammer was stolen and the costume he had to wear to retrieve it. We will watch him face the strongest giant in all the cosmos in single combat. And finally, we will sail with him out to the deepest sea, where he will cast a fishing line down into the dark and pull up something far older and far more terrible than any fish. But there is no hurry tonight. The stories will unfold at their own pace. You may listen if you wish. You may drift if you wish. You may close your eyes whenever they grow heavy. Let us begin. The first thing you must understand about Thor is the hammer. Mjolnir. That was its name, a word that meant the crusher, or perhaps the lightning. To say its name in the old tongue was to feel the weight of it in your mouth. Mjolnir. It was not a hammer like the hammers of mortal smiths. It was not a tool for shaping iron at the forge. It was a weapon, and it was a wonder, and it was the single greatest treasure of the gods. When Thor threw it, it would never miss its mark. When it struck, it could shatter mountains. And no matter how far it flew across the 9 worlds, it would always, always return to his hand. How did such a weapon come to be? The story is one of mischief and of cleverness and of the strange way that gifts are sometimes born from cruelty. It began, as so many stories of Asgard begin, with Loki. Loki, the trickster. Loki, the shape-changer. Loki, who walked among the gods even though his blood was the blood of giants. One day, for reasons known only to him, perhaps boredom, perhaps spite, perhaps the simple pleasure of seeing what would happen, Loki crept into the chamber of the goddess Sif while she slept. Sif was the wife of Thor, and Sif had hair that was famous throughout all the 9 worlds, hair the color of pure spun gold falling all the way to her waist. It was said that no jewel in any treasury, no sunlight on any morning could match the brightness of Sif's hair. While she slept, Loki took out a knife, and he cut it all away, every strand. He left her shorn down to the scalp. When Sif awoke and saw what had been done, she wept. And when Thor learned of it, he was not sad. He was furious. He took up Loki by the throat and lifted him from the floor and threatened to break every bone in his body, slowly, one by one. Loki, who was always good at speaking when his life depended on it, made a promise. He would go to the dwarves, the master craftsmen who lived in the deep places of the earth, and he would not return until he had brought back hair of pure gold for Sif, hair that would grow on her head as if it had always been hers. Thor agreed, but the threat hung in the air. If Loki failed, the punishment would still come. And so Loki traveled down into Svartalfheim, down into the dark realm of the dwarves, where the forges burned hot and the air was thick with smoke and the ringing of hammers. He came to a workshop owned by 2 brothers, dwarves of great skill, and he asked them to make him 3 things. Hair of gold for Sif, a spear that would never miss its mark, and a ship that could sail across any sea, but could also be folded up small enough to carry in a pocket. The dwarves agreed. They worked at their forges, and from their hands came 3 wonders: the hair of gold that would grow on Sif's head as if it were her own, the spear named Hrungnir that would always strike its target, and the ship named Skidbladnir that could carry an army and yet fold like cloth. Loki took the gifts, but on his way back to the surface, he stopped at another workshop. This one belonged to a different pair of dwarven brothers, Brock and Eitri. And here, Loki, being Loki, could not resist a wager. He bet his own head. He bet that Brock and Eitri could not make 3 treasures finer than the ones he already carried. If they failed, he kept his head. If they won, his head was theirs to take. The brothers accepted the bet. Eitri was the master smith. Brock was his assistant, working the bellows to keep the fire hot. And Eitri began to work. He took a pig's hide and threw it into the forge, and from the fire he drew out a great golden boar, a boar with bristles of gleaming gold that could run faster than any horse, that could fly through the air, that could give light wherever it went. He set the boar aside and began the second wonder. He threw gold into the fire and worked it for a long time. While he worked, he warned his brother that the bellows must never stop, not for one moment. The work was that delicate, and so Brock pumped the bellows, steady and strong. But Loki, watching, was uneasy, for he had seen the boar, and he knew the work of the second piece was even greater. He could not afford to lose his head, so he changed his shape into a fly. And he flew over and bit Brock on the arm, hard. But Brock gritted his teeth and did not stop pumping the bellows. And from the fire, Eitri drew out a ring of pure gold, a ring named Draupnir, a magical ring that every 9 nights would drip 8 more rings of equal weight from itself, a ring that multiplied wealth without end. Now Atri began the third piece, the most difficult of all. He threw a great lump of iron into the forge, and he warned Brock again. The bellows must not stop, not for any reason, not for one moment, or the work would be ruined. Loki was now desperate. He flew at Brock's face. He bit him on the eyelid, hard enough to draw blood. The blood ran down into Brock's eye, blinding him. And for just a moment, just one moment, Brock took one hand off the bellows to wipe the blood away. In that moment, the air in the forge faltered. But Atri did not pause. He drew the iron from the fire and shaped it. And what he drew out was a great hammer, a hammer of dark iron, heavy as a mountain, with a head so large it could crush boulders. Yet it had one flaw, born of that single missed breath of the bellows. The handle was short, too short. It would have to be wielded with one hand only, and that hand would need the strength of a god. This hammer was Mjolnir, the crusher, the lightning bringer. Loki and the dwarves brought their treasures to Asgard to be judged. The gods looked upon all 6 of them: the gold hair, the spear, the folding ship, the golden boar, the multiplying ring, the great hammer, and they declared the winners. Brok and Eitri had made the finer treasures. Mjolnir was the greatest of all the gifts, even with its short handle, for it was the hammer that would defend Asgard, the hammer that would defend all the worlds. Loki had lost his bet. Brok came forward to take his head, but Loki, clever as ever, pointed out that the bet had been for his head only, not for any part of his neck, and without cutting the neck, no one could take the head. Brock, frustrated, settled for a smaller punishment. He sewed Loki's lips shut with a leather cord so that the trickster could speak no more lies, at least not for a little while. And Thor took up Mjolnir. He hefted its weight. He felt how perfectly it sat in his hand, and he knew in that moment that this was the weapon he had been born to carry. Breathe slowly. In and out. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest. The hammer has been forged. The greatest weapon in the cosmos sits now in the hand of its rightful god. And Thor will need it, for the giants are stirring in their cold halls, and dark days are coming, and the protector of the worlds will have many roads yet to walk.
Sometime after the forging of Mjolnir, Thor set out upon what would become his most famous journey, the journey to Utgard, the journey to the hall of the giant king Hrungnir, a journey that would humble even the mightiest of the gods. He did not travel alone. With him came Loki, ever the companion in trouble. And along the way, they passed the night at the home of a humble farmer. Thor was generous to those who showed him hospitality, and he offered his 2 great goats, Hrungnir and Hrungnir, the goats who pulled his chariot, as a feast. He told the farmer's family that they could eat their fill, but they must place every bone, unbroken, back upon the goat skins when they were done. For Thor had a power. He could resurrect his goats every morning by laying his hammer upon the bones. But the farmer's son, a boy named Thialfi, was hungry, and he could not resist breaking open one of the leg bones to suck out the marrow. He put the bone back, hoping no one would notice. But when Thor blessed the bones the next morning, one of his goats rose up lame, limping on the broken leg.
Thor's anger was immense. The mountains shook with it. The boy and his sister fell to their knees, terrified. But Thor, in his vast strength, was not without mercy. Instead of destroying the family, he took the two children, the boy Thialfi, who would prove fast of foot, and his sister Röskva, to be his servants. And the four of them, Thor, Loki, Thialfi, and Röskva, set out together toward the east, toward Jotunheim, toward the land of the giants. For days they walked, through forests so dense that no light reached the forest floor, across rivers so wide they could barely see the far shore. As night fell, they came upon a strange building, a vast hall with a wide opening at one end and many smaller chambers within. They were tired, and they were grateful for shelter. They went inside and made their camp. But in the night, the ground began to shake, a great rumbling like an earthquake that would not end. The walls of the hall groaned. The earth itself seemed to be moving. They huddled together in fear, wondering what manner of storm had come upon them. They retreated into one of the smaller chambers, and there they spent the night, frightened, listening to the strange, thunderous noises that surrounded them. When morning came, they emerged from the hall to find that they had not slept in a hall at all. They had slept in a giant's glove. The hall was the main body of the glove. The smaller chambers were the fingers, and the rumbling of the night before had been the snoring of the glove's owner, sleeping nearby. He sat up now, and he was so vast that his head seemed to brush the clouds. He stretched and yawned and looked down at the small travelers with a grin. His name, he said, was Hrungnir. Hrungnir was friendly enough. He offered to travel with them, since they were heading the same direction. He carried his own provisions in a great sack, and to lighten Thor's load, he offered to put all of their food in the sack as well, and carry it himself. Thor agreed. Hrungnir tied the sack tight and slung it over his shoulder, and they walked together for the day. When evening came, Hrungnir lay down to sleep beneath an oak tree, and he was snoring within moments. Thor and his companions tried to open the sack to take out their dinner. But no matter how they pulled at the knots, no matter how Thor strained, the sack would not open. The knots had been tied by a giant's hands, and they were beyond the strength of even a god to undo. Thor was furious. He took up Mjolnir and strode over to where Hrungnir lay snoring. He raised the hammer high and brought it down with all his might upon the giant's head. Hrungnir stirred. He opened his eyes lazily. "Did a leaf fall on me?" he asked. And then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Thor stood there in shock. His mightiest blow, the kind that could break mountains, had not even raised a bump on the giant's brow. Later in the night, the snoring grew so loud that no one could sleep. Thor rose again, took up his hammer, and struck the giant a second time, harder than before, with all the strength of the god of thunder. Skrymir stirred again. "Did an acorn fall from the tree?" he asked. And again he went back to sleep. By dawn, Thor was beyond fury. He stood over the giant and brought Mjolnir down a third time, harder than ever, with such force that the very mountains shook. Skrymir woke up properly this time, sat up and stretched. "I think a bit of bird droppings fell on my head," he said cheerfully. "Time to start the day." He walked with them a little further, then took his leave. He pointed toward a great fortress on the horizon. "Utgard," he said, "the hall of the giant king." Then he wished them luck, and he went his way, and they never saw him again. But they should have remembered him. For Skrymir was not what he seemed. Breathe slowly. In and out. Let your mind rest just for a moment. Let the image settle. The vast giant snoring beneath the oak tree, the god of thunder, his greatest blows landing as gently as falling leaves. There are powers in the old stories that even the gods do not understand. There are mysteries beneath the surface of the world, and tonight we have only just begun to see them. Thor and his companions came at last to Utgard. The fortress was so vast that they had to crane their necks to see the top of its gates. The gates were locked, but the bars were so far apart that the four of them simply slipped between them and walked into the great hall. Inside sat the giant king upon his throne. He was even larger than Skrymir, if such a thing were possible. He looked down at the small travelers with amusement. He greeted them by name, for he knew them all somehow before they had spoken a word, and he told them that in his hall no one was welcome unless they could prove themselves with some feat of skill. What could they do? In what art did they excel? Loki spoke first. He said he could eat faster than any man. The king brought out a long wooden trough, filled it with meat, and seated Loki at one end. At the other end, he seated a strange-looking giant named Logi. They began to eat. Loki ate as fast as any creature had ever eaten. He devoured the meat. He stripped the bones bare. He reached the middle of the trough. But Loki had not just eaten the meat. He had eaten the meat and the bones and the wooden trough itself. He had eaten everything. Loki had lost. Thjalfi, the swift-footed boy, said he could outrun anyone. The king brought him out to a great open field and matched him against a small, slim giant named Hugi. They ran 3 races. Each time, by the time Thjalfi reached the finish, Hugi had already turned around and was coming back to meet him. Thjalfi was the fastest mortal in all the worlds, but he had been beaten 3 times in a row. Now Thor stepped forward. He was angry. His pride was wounded. He demanded a contest of his own. The king smiled and offered him a simple challenge. A drinking horn, a single drinking horn, and Thor had to empty it. Thor took the horn. It was long, but no longer than horns he had drained many times before. He took a great breath and he drank. He drank as deep as his lungs allowed. He drank until his face turned red, until his beard was wet, until he had to stop for breath. He looked into the horn. The level of the liquid had dropped only slightly. He drank again, longer this time, with all the strength of his mighty body. His chest heaved, his eyes watered, and when he stopped, the level had dropped a little more, but the horn was still nearly full. He drank a third time with such force that the air around him whistled. And when he set the horn down, exhausted, the level had moved only a finger breadth. The king laughed gently. "You are not as strong as I had heard, Thor. Perhaps a smaller test? My cat. Lift my cat from the floor, and I will be impressed." A gray cat lay nearby, ordinary and small. Thor strode over and seized it. He lifted with all his might. The cat arched its back. One paw came off the ground. Thor pulled harder. 2 paws. He strained until the muscles in his arms threatened to tear. And he managed to raise 3 paws of the cat from the ground, but the 4th would not come. The king nodded. "Better. But still, perhaps you would wrestle? My old nursemaid lies in the corner. Try your strength against hers." A wizened old woman, white-haired and bent, came forward. Thor felt the heat of his shame rising. To wrestle an old woman? But he agreed. They grappled. And no matter how Thor pulled and twisted, the old woman would not fall. In the end, it was Thor who was forced down to one knee. The king ended the contests. He had Thor and his companions seated for a feast, and they were treated kindly. They spent the night in the hall, and in the morning the king walked with them to the gates to see them off. And then, as they were leaving, the king spoke truly for the first time. "Thor," he said, "I will tell you something now that I should not. I am a magician. From the moment you entered my realm, I have been deceiving you. Hrungnir, the giant you traveled with, that was me. The sack you could not open was bound with magic spells. The blows you struck upon my sleeping head, I saw them coming, and I placed an invisible mountain between us. If you turn back now, you will see a mountain with 3 valleys carved into it, deeper than any geology should allow. Those are the marks of your hammer." Thor stared at him. In the contest last night, the king continued, "You were not deceived as I was, but you were given impossible tasks. Loki ate against fire itself. Logi was the spirit of flame, which consumes everything. Thialfi raced against thought, for Hugi was thought, and no foot can outrun a thought. The drinking horn? Its other end was placed in the sea. You drank so deeply that the tides themselves were lowered. When you return to the world, you will find the oceans have ebbed by an amount no one can explain. The cat you tried to lift, it was Jormungandr, the great Midgard serpent who encircles the world. You lifted him until his back nearly scraped the sky. And the old woman you wrestled? She was old age herself. No being, mortal or god, will ever defeat her in the end." Thor's eyes grew wide. The king continued, "You are mightier than I knew, mightier than I would have believed possible. And I will not let you visit my realm again. For if you returned, knowing the truth, my magic would not save me a second time." He bowed, and then he turned and walked back to his hall. Thor lifted his hammer to crush him, to shatter the entire fortress in his rage. But when he turned around, the fortress was gone. The walls were gone. The gates were gone. There was nothing but empty plain, stretching to the horizon. The giant king and his hall had vanished as though they had never been. Thor stood alone in the vast field, his hammer raised. And slowly, slowly, he lowered it. He had been deceived, but he had also done things no god had ever done. He had nearly drained the sea. He had nearly lifted the world serpent. He had brought old age to one knee. And he carried that knowledge home with him, in silence, all the long road back to Asgard. Breathe slowly, in and out. Let your body sink a little deeper. Let the great fortress fade from your mind, like mist burning off in morning sun. The lesson of Utgard is an old one, that what we see is not always what is, that the world is deeper and stranger and more layered than even the gods can know. Rest with that thought gently as the night turns onward. Now we come to a tale of a different sort, a tale that begins, as many of Thor's tales do, with a great loss. One morning in Asgard, Thor awoke and reached for his hammer. And it was not there. Mjolnir was gone. He searched the hall. He searched the chambers. He searched every corner of his home. The hammer was nowhere. And as the panic rose in his chest, he understood. The hammer had been stolen. Thor went to Loki. Loki, after all, was the one who could shape change, who could fly between the worlds in the form of a falcon. Thor asked him to take the form of a bird and search the 9 realms until he found Mjolnir. Loki agreed, and Freya, the goddess of love, lent him her cloak of falcon feathers for the journey. Loki flew east over the great sea until he came to Jotunheim, and there, in the hall of a giant named Thrym, he found his answer. Thrym sat upon a hill, braiding gold collars for his hounds, trimming the manes of his horses. He greeted Loki with a smile. "What news from Asgard?" he asked. "What news from the realm of the elves? Why does Loki come alone to Jotunheim?" "I bring no news but one," said Loki. "Thor's hammer is gone. Do you know where it lies?" Thrym laughed. "I have hidden Mjolnir," he said, 8 miles deep beneath the earth. No one will find it. No one will retrieve it. Unless, said Loki. "Unless the gods bring me Freya as a bride, then and only then will I return the hammer." Loki flew back to Asgard with the news, and the gods gathered in council. They came to Freya, and they told her what Thrym demanded. Freya was the most beautiful of all the goddesses, and Thrym had long lusted after her. The gods asked her gently if she would dress in bridal clothes and travel to Jotunheim to retrieve the hammer. Freya's response was not gentle. She refused with such fury that the great hall shook. Her famous necklace, the Brisingamen, snapped from her throat in her rage. She would not be bartered to a giant. She would not be sold to ransom even the greatest weapon of the gods. And the gods, seeing her fury, did not press the matter. But the hammer was still missing, and without Mjolnir, Asgard was vulnerable. The giants would soon learn of its absence, and they would come. Then Heimdall, the watchman, who saw farther than any other, spoke up. He proposed a different plan, a plan so strange that the others stared at him in silence. "Let Thor go in Freya's place," he said. "Dress him as a bride, veil his face, bring him to Thrym's hall." Thor, when he heard this proposal, was not pleased. He was the god of thunder, the mightiest warrior of Asgard. To dress as a woman, to wear bridal clothing, to feign affection for a giant, it offended every part of his pride. He refused. But Loki, ever practical, pointed out the alternative. Without the hammer, the giants would invade. They would burn Asgard to the ground. The gods would fall. All of this would happen because Thor was too proud to wear a dress. Thor, with great reluctance, agreed. They dressed him in a long white gown. They placed Freya's necklace upon his chest. They covered his red beard with a thick veil. They placed jewels upon his hands. And to make the deception complete, Loki dressed himself as a maidservant. For Loki, as a shape changer, found such things amusing. The two of them rode together to Jotunheim in a chariot pulled by Thor's goats. The earth shook beneath them. The mountains trembled. Lightning split the sky as they passed. For Thor, even in disguise, was Thor. They came to Thrym's hall, and the giant met them at the gate. He was overjoyed. He had won, he believed, the most beautiful goddess in the cosmos for his bride. He led them inside, and he ordered a great feast. But at the feast, things began to go wrong. The bride sat at the table, and the bride ate. She ate 8 whole salmon. She ate an entire ox. She drank 3 barrels of mead. Thrym leaned over to Loki, who he believed was a maidservant, and whispered, "I have never seen a bride eat so much." Loki, quick as ever, smiled and said, "Freya has been so excited to come to Jotunheim that she has not eaten in 8 days. Hunger has made her ravenous." Thrym was satisfied. He leaned forward to lift the veil, to look upon the face of his bride. But when he raised the veil even a little, he saw eyes, fierce, burning eyes, glowing like coals. And he drew back, startled. "Why are her eyes so terrible?" he asked. Loki, again, was ready. Freya has not slept in 8 nights in her excitement to come to Jotunheim. Sleeplessness has made her eyes red and fierce. Thrym was satisfied a second time. The wedding ceremony began, and as was the custom in those days, Thrym called for the hammer to be brought out. to bless the bride, to consecrate the marriage. Mjolnir was retrieved from its hiding place, and it was laid upon the lap of the bride. And in that moment, Thor's hand closed around the handle of his hammer. He rose from his seat. He tore off the veil. He drew himself up to his full height, his red beard blazing, his eyes burning with the fire of the storm. And he raised Mjolnir high. What followed was not a wedding. It was a slaughter. Thor struck down Thrym first, and then every giant in the hall, every giant who had laughed, every giant who had attended, every giant who had so much as nodded approval. Mjolnir flashed and thundered, and when it was done, the hall was silent, and Thor stood alone among the fallen, his hammer in his hand at last. He and Loki returned to Asgard. The hammer was home. The realm was safe. And though Thor was teased, gently, by those brave enough about his bridal day, he never lost the hammer again. Breathe in slowly and out. Let the thunder soften in your mind. Let the laughter of the gods fade to a hum, then to silence. 2 more tales remain tonight, and then the long quiet of sleep. There is still time. There is no hurry. Of all the giants in Jotunheim, none was stronger than Hrungnir. He had a head of stone, a heart of stone, a shield of stone, and he wielded a great whetstone as his weapon, sharp and heavy enough to split shields in 2. Among his own kind, he was unmatched. And one day, in a moment of pride, he made a boast that would lead to his end. He had been drinking in the halls of Asgard. The gods had welcomed him as a guest, and he had drunk too much of their mead. As he grew drunker, his pride grew with him. He boasted that he could lift the entire hall and carry it back to Jotunheim. He boasted that he could drown all of Asgard in a great flood. He boasted that he would kill every god in the realm, except for Freya and Sif, who he would take as his wives. The gods listened, and their patience grew thin. They sent for Thor. Thor strode into the hall, hammer in hand, and demanded to know who had given a giant the right to drink in the halls of the Aesir. Hrungnir, drunk and proud, was not afraid. He challenged Thor to single combat, a duel between gods and giants. They would meet at a place called Griotunagardar, and there they would fight, and the world would see whose strength was greater. Thor accepted. The day of the duel came. Hrungnir stood at the appointed place, his stone shield raised before him, his great whetstone held ready. He had brought a second giant with him, a creation of clay, 9 miles tall, formed by the giants in the night and given the heart of a mare to make him fast. This clay giant, named Mokurkalfi, was meant to fight beside Hrungnir. But the clay giant was a poor fighter. When Thor's young servant Thjalfi arrived ahead of his master, Mokurkalfi was so terrified that he wet himself, and Thjalfi, with the courage of a young man, struck him down with simple cleverness before Thor even arrived. When Thor came striding across the plain, all that remained for him was Hrungnir. The 2 of them met, The battle was brief and terrible. Thor flung Mjolnir with all his strength. Hrungnir flung his whetstone in the same instant. The two weapons met in the air. The whetstone shattered against the hammer. Pieces of it flew everywhere. One great shard struck Thor in the head, embedding itself in his skull. And Mjolnir, having broken the whetstone, flew on and struck Hrungnir in the forehead. The giant fell. His great stone body crashed down upon Thor, pinning the god's leg beneath it. Thor lay there, bleeding from the head, unable to move. The gods came to lift Hrungnir's body away, but none of them could move it. The giant was too vast. None could free Thor. And then a small figure came forward. Magni, Thor's 3-year-old son, already as strong as any full-grown god. He stepped to his father's side, took hold of Hrungnir's leg, and lifted the giant's body away as if it weighed nothing. Thor rose, bleeding, and looked upon his son with great pride. He told him that he would one day be the strongest of the Aesir, and he gave Magni the great stone horse that Hrungnir had ridden. But the shard of stone was still in Thor's head. They tried to remove it. A wise woman named Groa came to chant healing spells over the wound, and the stone began to loosen. But in her joy at hearing news of her long-lost husband, news Thor had brought her from his travels, she lost her place in the chant. The healing was incomplete. The stone could not be removed. To this day, in the old stories, the stone remains in Thor's head, and it is said that no one should throw a whetstone across the floor of a hall, for if they do, the shard in Thor's head stirs and pains him far away in Asgard. Breathe slowly, in and out. The duels of gods leave their marks. Some wounds never quite heal. There are scars in the world that have been there since the beginning. There are scars in the gods themselves, and there are scars in all of us, mortal as we are. Rest gently in the knowledge that all things bear their wounds, and all things somehow go on. Our final tale of the night is the strangest of all, the most haunting, and the most important, for it foreshadows the end of all things. It begins at the hall of a giant named Hrungnir. Thor went to visit him alone to borrow a great cauldron, for the gods needed it for a feast. Hrungnir was reluctant to lend it. He decided instead to test his guest. He invited Thor on a fishing trip. They sailed out together in Hrungnir's boat far across the cold northern sea. Hrungnir rowed. He brought them to his usual fishing grounds, a place rich with whale and seal, and he prepared to drop his lines. But Thor, restless, demanded that they go further, past the safe waters, out into the deep, out to where the sea grew dark and the cold rose from below. Hrungnir protested. He warned that out there, in the deepest waters, dangerous things stirred. But Thor would not listen. He took the oars and rowed himself with such force that the boat flew across the waves. He rowed until they were so far from shore that no land was visible in any direction, until the water beneath them was black, and the wind was thin, and the air felt heavy with something old. and there Thor stopped rowing. He took out his fishing line. For bait, he had brought the head of an ox, Hymir's prize bull, which Thor had killed for the purpose, much to the giant's annoyance. He hooked the head onto the line, and he cast it down, down, down into the dark. The line sank, and sank, and sank further still. Then, with a violence that nearly tore Thor's arms from his body, the line went taut. Something had taken the bait. Something enormous. Thor began to pull. He pulled with the strength of the god of thunder, with the strength of the protector of the worlds, with the strength of the wielder of Mjolnir. The line bit into his hands. The boat tilted. The sea churned. And slowly, slowly, the something on the end of the line began to rise. Hymir, watching, grew terrified, for he knew what lay in those depths. He knew what Thor was pulling up, and he knew that some things should not be brought to the surface. Thor strained. His feet pressed so hard against the bottom of the boat that they broke through the wood and reached the sea below. He braced himself against the hull of the world, and he pulled. The water boiled, the waves rose, and then, breaking through the surface, came a head. A vast, terrible head, coiled, ancient, with eyes like cold stars. It was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, the great snake that encircled the world, the brother of Fenrir, the child of Loki, the being whose body wrapped around the entire earth beneath the sea, biting its own tail, held the world together. And Thor had pulled it up from the deep. The serpent thrashed. Its eyes met Thor's eyes. And in that meeting, all the world held its breath. For it was prophesied that one day, at the end of all things, Thor and Jormungandr would meet in battle, that they would kill each other. That the meeting of Thor and the serpent was the meeting of doom. Thor raised Mjolnir. He prepared to strike. He prepared to end his ancient enemy here, now, and to spare the world the prophecy of Ragnarok. But Hymir was terrified. He saw what was about to happen. He saw the serpent's eyes. He saw the thrashing of the great body in the waves. And in his fear, perhaps in his wisdom, he reached for his knife. And he cut the line. Thor lunged forward, but he was too late. The line snapped. The serpent slid back into the sea. The dark waters closed over it. And Jormungandr was gone, swallowed once more by the deep. Thor was furious. He struck Hymir from the boat with the back of his hand, and the giant tumbled into the sea. And Thor rowed back to shore alone in silence, his hammer in his lap, the line still trailing useless from his fingers. He had met the serpent. He had pulled it from the deep. He had looked into its ancient eyes, and he had let it go, or rather, it had been let go. The prophecy still stood. The end was still coming. And Thor knew now, with a certainty he had never felt before, that one day at the twilight of the gods, he would meet Jormungandr again, and one of them would not return from that meeting. But that day was not yet. That tale is for another night. Many more tales lie between us and the end. For now, rest. For now, the serpent sleeps in the deep, the hammer sleeps in Thor's hall, the gods walk in Asgard, and the long, slow night unfolds just as it did 1,000 years ago, just as it does tonight. You have traveled far, wanderer. You have seen the Forging of Mjolnir. You have walked into the hall of Utgard. You have seen Thor in a wedding dress. You have watched a duel of stone and thunder. And you have looked into the eyes of the world serpent itself. Now, let it all soften. Let the images blur like reflections in still water. Let the voice grow distant. Let the night wrap around you, dark and gentle and kind. The gods will be here, waiting when you return. Until then, rest well.